Welcome back to Chapter 2. So I'm going to go through a picture walk again and show you the pictures in Chapter 2 as we review what's going on in the story. If you'll recall, it's 10 years later after Sirius Black met Professor Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall in front of Harry's house and left him with his Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia and his cousin Dudley. And now, 10 years later, Harry's living with them, but he sleeps in the cupboard under the stairs, which is filled with lots of spiders, which he doesn't mind. He's used to them. So there's lots of spiders here. And it is Dudley's birthday, and they're about ready to head to the zoo. But the lady that normally babysits Harry is not able to come today because she's broken her leg. And we've already read all of this, if you can see. And we're actually, when we start reading, we're going to start right there. That's how far we've already read in the first 10 minutes. And they're at the zoo, and there is the gorilla at the zoo. And that's probably Dudley. And this is Harry at the zoo. And then we have a large boa constrictor, which we're going to have to figure out what happens. And that's the end of the picture walk for this chapter. So let's get back, and we're ready to start reading. So I'm going to begin reading, and the picture's going to go dark while you listen. So just close your eyes and imagine the story, and let's begin reading. Half an hour later, Harry, who couldn't believe his luck, was sitting in the back of the Dursleys' car with Piers and Dudley on the way to the zoo for the first time in his life. His aunt and uncle hadn't been able to think of anything else to do with him, but before they left, Uncle Vernon had taken Harry aside. "I'm warning you," he said, putting his large purple face up close to Harry's. "I'm warning you now, boy. Any funny business, anything at all, and you'll be in the cupboard from now until Christmas." "I'm not going to do anything," said Harry, "honestly." But Uncle Vernon didn't believe him. No one ever did. The problem was, strange things often happened around Harry, and it was just no good telling the Dursleys. He didn't make them happen. Once, Aunt Petunia, tired of Harry's hair, coming back from the barber's looking as if he hadn't been there at all, had taken a pair of kitchen scissors and cut his hair so short he was almost bald except for his fringe, which she left to hide that horrible scar. Dudley had laughed himself silly at Harry, who spent a sleepless night imagining school the next day, where he was already laughed at for his baggy clothes and sellotape glasses. Next morning, however, he had gotten up to find his hair exactly as it had been before Aunt Petunia had sheared it off. He had been given a week in his cupboard for this, even though he had tried to explain that he couldn't explain how it had grown so quickly. Another time, Aunt Petunia had been trying to force him into a revolting old sweater of Dudley's, brown with orange baubles. The harder she tried to pull it over his head, the smaller it seemed to become, until finally it might have fitted a glove puppet, but certainly wouldn't fit Harry. Aunt Petunia had decided it must have shrunk in the wash, and to his great relief, Harry wasn't punished. On the other hand, he'd gotten into terrible trouble for being found on the roof of the school kitchens. Dudley's gang had been chasing him, and as usual, when, as much to Harry's surprise as anyone else's, there he was sitting on the chimney. The Dursleys had received a very angry letter from the school's principal telling them Harry had been climbing the school buildings, but all he'd tried to do, as he shouted at Uncle Vernon through the locked door of his cupboard, was jump behind the big bins outside the kitchen doors. Harry supposed that the wind must have caught him mid-jump. But today, nothing was going to go wrong. It was even worth being with Dudley and Piers to be spending the day somewhere that wasn't school, his cupboard, or Mrs. Figg's cabbage-smelling living room. While he drove, Uncle Vernon complained to Aunt Petunia. He liked to complain about things. People at work, Harry, the council, Harry, the bank, and Harry were just a few of his favorite subjects. This morning it was motorbikes, roaring along like maniacs. "The young hoodlums," he said, as a motorbike overtook them. I had a dream about a motorbike, said Harry, remembering suddenly. It was flying. Uncle Vernon nearly crashed into the car in front. He turned right around in his seat and yelled at Harry, his face like a gigantic beetroot with a mustache. Motorbikes don't fly! Dudley and Piers sniggered. I know they don't, said Harry. It was only a dream. But he wished he hadn't seen anything. If there was one thing the Dursleys hated even more than his asking questions, it was his talking about anything acting in a way that it shouldn't, no matter if it was in a dream or even a cartoon. They seemed to think he might get dangerous ideas. It was a very sunny Saturday, and the zoo was crowded with families. The Dursleys bought Dudley and Piers large chocolate ice creams at the entrance, and then, because the lady in the van had asked Harry what he wanted before he could hurry away, they bought him a cheap lemon ice lolly. Wasn't bad either, Harry thought, licking it as they watched a gorilla scratching its head and looking remarkably like Dudley, except that it wasn't blonde. Harry had the best morning he'd had in a long time. He was careful to walk a little bit apart from the Dursleys so that Dudley and Piers, who were starting to get bored with the animals by lunchtime, wouldn't fall back on their favorite hobby of hitting him. They ate in the zoo restaurant, and when Dudley had a tantrum because his Knickerbocker Glory wasn't big enough, Uncle Vernon bought him another one, and Harry was allowed to finish the first. Harry felt afterwards that he should have known it was all too good to last. After lunch, they went to the reptile house. It was cool and dark in there, and with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Dudley and Piers wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. Dudley quickly found the largest snake in the place. Could have wrapped its body twice around Uncle Vernon's car and crushed it into the dustbin, but at that moment he didn't look in the mood. In fact, it was fast asleep. Dudley stood with his nose pressed against the glass, staring at the glistening brown coils. "Make it move," he whined to his father. Uncle Vernon tapped on the glass, but the snake didn't budge. "Do it again," Dudley ordered. Uncle Vernon rapped the glass smartly with his knuckles, but the snake just snoozed on. "This is boring," Dudley moaned. He shuffled away. Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. He wouldn't have been surprised if it had died of boredom itself. No company except stupid people drumming their fingers in the glass and trying to disturb it all day long. It was worse than having a cupboard as a bedroom, where the only visitor was Aunt Petunia hammering on the door to wake him up. At least he got to visit in the rest of the house. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes slowly. Very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on level with Harry's. It winked. Harry stared. Then he looked quickly around to see if anyone was watching. They weren't. He looked back at the snake and winked too. The snake jerked its head toward Uncle Vernon and Dudley and then raised its eyes to the ceiling. It gave Harry a look that said quite plainly, "I get that all the time." "I know," Harry murmured through the glass, though he wasn't sure the snake could hear him. "It must be really annoying." The snake nodded vigorously. "Where do you come from, anyway?" Harry asked. The snake jabbed its tail at a little sign next to the glass. Harry peered at it. Boa constrictor, Brazil. "Was it nice there?" The boa constrictor jabbed its tail at the sign again, and Harry read on. "This specimen was bred in the zoo." "Oh, I see. You've never been to Brazil." As the snake shook its head, a deafening shout behind Harry made both of them jump. "Dudley! Mr. Dursley! Come and look at this snake! You won't believe what it's doing!" Dudley came waddling towards them as fast as he could. "Out of the way, you!" he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it had happened. 1 second, Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leapt back with howls of horror. Harry sat and gasped. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out on the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past him, Harry could have sworn a low hissing voice said, "Brazil, here I come. Thanks, amigo." The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying. Where did the glass go?" The zoo director himself made Aunt Petunia a cup of strong, sweet tea while he apologized over and over again. Piers and Dudley could only gibber. As far as Harry had seen, the snake hadn't done anything except snap playfully at their heels as it passed. But by the time they were all back in Uncle Vernon's car, Dudley was telling them how it had nearly bitten his leg off, while Piers was swearing it had tried to squeeze him to death. But worst of all, for Harry at least, was Piers calming down enough to say, "Harry was talking to it, weren't you, Harry?" Okay, so we're 10 minutes in, so we're going to do a super quick picture walk, and then we'll finish the story in the last video. Okay, so here we go. Chapter 2, The Vanishing Glass. And there's Harry in his cupboard, and the spiders, and Dudley's presents, and the gorilla, and Dudley, and Harry looking at the boa constrictor. And now we have this much left to read. So I'll show you where we ended. We just finished this page. So here's Harry looking at the boa constrictor, and we've read all of this. We finished this page, so when we come back, we're starting on boa constrictor page.